Hey, today I'm going to show you guys how to set up this third-person shooter behavior for characters in Unreal Engine 5. Now, we've recently talked about character movement in Unreal Engine before, but a few of you asked for more complex setups, specifically how to do shooter animations. So even though we already did a video on this, I'm going to treat this one as a complete beginner video. So even if you've never used Unreal Engine before, I'm going to go click by click so that you can follow along. All you need to follow along is a 3D character, which is rigged and has a set of third-person shooter animations, like gun animations. You can follow along with your own character or one from the Unreal Engine store, but for simplicity, I'm going to be using a Mixamo-based character, specifically from character.productioncrate.com. So this is our new character builder tool, which uses all of the models from RenderCrate. And we've set this up so that you can just build your characters however you want them and mix and match all the models that we have up on the store. So if you want a tactical vest with Hawaiian shorts, you can do that. For this video, I'm going to build a soldier character though. So I'm going to grab a military vest with a jacket. Let's do some military pants and a military helmet. Now, this is an army guy, but we can change the color options. So maybe I want to make like a sheriff character instead. And we can also choose different skin colors here if we want to. Feel free to build whatever character you want. When you're done, go to downloads. And if you have a free ProductionCrate account, you can actually download LOD2 right here. This is the free version of the character. It's the lowest detail version, but it's actually what you see right here. The free version is just what you see on the website. Now, if you are downloading a free version, you're going to be getting an FBX, so there's a little bit of setup that needs to be done. Go ahead and watch our previous video on characters in Unreal Engine if you need to know how to set up an FBX character. If you have a pro account, we actually have this button right here where you can click on Unreal Engine UPack file, and it will create an Unreal Engine file for you, already set up with all the materials plugged in. Just be sure to name your character first, so I'll name mine Sheriff. Go ahead and press download, and now we need to get a bunch of animations from Mixamo. To make sure the animations match our character's proportions perfectly, you can go to the FBX download right here, and go to the bottom right where it says Advanced. Click on that, and you can download the mannequin. So this is downloading a mannequin with no materials and no gear, and it's just a simple model that we can upload to Mixamo. So for this process, we're going to need a whole bunch of animations. We need an idling animation where he's holding a rifle but not aiming. So I'm going to search for rifle idle, and this one here looks pretty good, so we'll download this one. We also need a rifle walk where he's not aiming. Let's also download rifle run. This one looks pretty good. Next, I'm going to download one called rifle sprint. This one's called sprint forward. And again, he's sprinting as fast as he can, but he's not aiming. Once you get this one, now we need to download a bunch of animations where he is aiming. So once again, I'll search for rifle idle, and I'm going to download this one called rifle aiming idle. After that, we need to get him walking in all 4 directions while aiming. So if I search for rifle walk, there's one here called walking, where he looks like this. He's walking forward and aiming. We also need this one where he's walking backwards and aiming. And then we need walk right and aiming, walk left and aiming. And now we need his running animations where he's going in all 4 directions. So we need quite a bit. Lastly, we just need 2 specialty animations. So we need rifle jump. And I'm going to grab this jump loop where he's holding his rifle. And then I want this one where he's firing his rifle, but I'm going to increase the recoil all the way because I think that looks pretty cool and snappy. Okay, with all those animations downloaded, I'm going to jump over to Unreal Engine. Okay, so here I am in Unreal Engine, or rather Epic Games Launcher. I need to launch Unreal Engine now. If this is your first time using Unreal Engine, you're going to have to install it up here in the top right. You should be able to use any version of Unreal Engine 5 to follow along with this tutorial. So I'm going to launch my engine, and when it loads up, you should see this window. This is where we can create a new project. So under the games category, I'm going to choose a third-person game right here. I'm going to uncheck starter content because that just adds a whole bunch of extra stuff to the game that you don't really need. If you want to play around with it, it gives you a bunch of extra materials and models and like some smoke effects. So you can include it if you want, but I'm not going to include it with mine. And I'll call this a soldier project and press create. And when Unreal Engine loads up, we're going to hit Control Space to open the content browser. And then right here, I'm going to click on this import button. Navigate to where you downloaded that Sheriff UPack or whatever you named it, and just double click it. Now when it's done, the characters folder inside of the content folder should have a new folder called Sheriff. And if you open that up, you'll see materials, meshes, and textures. If you jump into the meshes folder, you can look for the one that's labeled skeletal mesh here at the bottom. Mine's called Sheriff Skeletal Mesh. And we can double click on that and see if the model looks as we expect. And you can see that by downloading that UPack file from characters.productioncrate.com, all the materials are already plugged in and everything. There's no setup to be done. Now we need to import our animations. So I'm going to go back to my Sheriff folder and I'm going to right click and add a new folder labeled animations. Now for these, we can actually just drag and drop them from our downloads folder. Don't just press OK when this window pops up. We need to make a few changes. First of all, down here where it says skeleton, it's really important to associate this with the Sheriff skeleton. Another thing to pay attention to is up here where it says offset rotation. Sometimes Mixamo animations come in rotated 90 degrees, like they're laying on their face. If that happens, this is where we will fix it. But first I'm just going to import it and see how it goes. And I can see that, yep, they're all laying on their face. That's not good. So we can actually just press delete to get rid of all these. I'm going to press force delete right here, and I'll drag and drop these back in. Don't forget to set your skeleton to the Sheriff skeleton, and where it says offset rotation, on the first box, the x-axis, I'm going to type in -90, and then we'll press import. And now all of our animations should come in upright. Cool. Now these aren't really labeled well for our purposes, so I'm going to take some time to rename some of these. For example, we have rifle run, and it looks like he's running but not aiming. And then we also have an animation called rifle run 1, where he is aiming. So it's probably a good idea to label this in a better way. So I'm going to press F2 to rename it, and I'm going to type in aim_run forward. And let's just try to name them consistently. So this one here where it says rifle aiming idle, I'm just going to type in aim_idle. And then I've got two of them here just called strafe. So I'm going to change the name of that for sure, because it's not very clear. So this one is aim run right. You can see where he's running to his right. So I'll rename it aim run right. Strafe 2, he's running to his left. So I'll rename that aim run left. And then the ones where he's not aiming, I'm just going to call them walk, run, idle, and sprint. You can name them however you want. I just want it to be really clear for me. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and save my whole project just to be sure. So to do that, you hit Control-Shift-S, and that'll save everything in your project. Next, we need to get a rifle for him to carry. If you go to RenderCrate and search for gun, we have a few different options here. You could choose a sci-fi gun, one of these real-world guns. Quick tip though, if you downloaded the same character I did with this tactical vest, the materials for the magazines on his chest are the exact same material as this AR-15. So if you were to download this AR-15 right here, the material is actually already set up. But feel free to download whichever one you want. It doesn't matter. So I'm going to download this AR-15, but I'm going to download the lowest resolution one because we already have the materials loaded into Unreal Engine, and I don't want to spend time downloading this massive 8K texture. Now, the other thing about this AR-15 model, if that's the one you choose, is it's really old, and at the time of this recording, it doesn't have an FBX associated with it. It's just OBJ, and so it's going to come into Unreal Engine kind of at a weird angle and the wrong size. And so that's just something we're going to have to deal with. If you download a newer weapon from the website, these will all be scaled properly for Unreal Engine. So let's go back to our Sheriff folder and right click, add a new folder called gun or rifle. So from the downloads folder, I'm going to drag and drop in the AR-15 rifle, not the one that says AR-15 high, because we don't need this really high resolution model for a video game. So let's go ahead and click this and drag and drop it into Unreal Engine. And when this window pops up, we want to change a few things. First of all, if you still have offset rotation here, you can set it back to 0. And we can also go to the Materials tab and uncheck Import Materials. Because in my case, if you remember, I imported the character who has the tactical rig on his chest, and he already has the AR-15 material associated with him. So we don't need to recreate it. The other thing we want to do is go to Static Meshes and go down here and go to Combine Static Mesh. And that's because in this case, the gun will come in with the magazine separate. If that's what you want because you want to do some reload animations, you can leave this unchecked, but we're not going to do that for this video. Okay, now let's press import, and you see we get a rifle and a texture. We actually don't need this texture, we can delete it. And I can drag and drop the rifle into the scene, and I can see that it's massive. As I said, it's not going to be the right size because it was made long before we were ever making models for Unreal Engine. Now we can see it doesn't have a material assigned to it, so I'm going to double click on it right here, and we can assign a default material for it. Again, if you downloaded the soldier character with the tactical vest, you already have an AR-15 material, so I'm just going to search for AR-15 and apply it like this. Just give it a sec to load, and we can see it looks pretty good. Okay, let's delete that out of our scene, and let's apply it to our character before we set up the character movements. So if we go back to the Sheriff folder, and then go into Meshes, Skeletal Mesh, and then go to the Sheriff Skeletal Mesh, it's the one with the pink line right here at the bottom. Here's our Sheriff. I want to attach this to his right hand bone. So I'm going to go to Character right here, down to Bones, and I'm going to show all hierarchy. So now we can see his entire skeleton. Over here in the Skeleton Tree tab, I'm going to scroll down until I find the right hand. Then I'll right click on that bone and add a socket. Now we have a socket called right-hand socket. We can press F2 to rename it, and I'll call this gun socket. You can also right-click on this socket and go down to Add Preview Asset and search for the AR-15. If we zoom out, we can see that the gun is attached to his hand, but it's massive. Now we can scale and position this into place so that when we attach the gun for real, it'll be positioned correctly. So I'm going to double check that I have my gun socket selected. It's really important that that's what you have selected when you do this. And I'm just going to move, rotate, and scale this into place. If the snapping is making it difficult to scale it properly, you can go up here to the top right and turn off all these blue buttons, and then you'll be able to scale it without snapping. Now another thing that can help you scale and position this properly is to get him into one of his poses. So over here in the top left, I'm going to click right here, and we can choose a preview animation, and I'm going to choose the aim idle. So now we can see what the gun will look like when he's actually idling. Now it's hard to move this thing and scale it and rotate it when he's animating, so down here in the bottom right, I'm going to pause the animation. Now, because this model isn't really made for Unreal Engine, it's not really positioned in the right place by default. There are ways to create guns and other assets for Unreal Engine. There's certain ways to do it so that it's just a lot easier to set up by default. If you would like to learn how to do that, just leave a comment and we could probably make a video on it. If you're having trouble getting the scale right, just look at the hand in relation to the handle. Remember, this part of the gun here is made to fit a hand. So if it looks really long, just scale the gun down. And these AR-15s are actually smaller than you think. Unfortunately, this model isn't really designed to have moving parts, so this shoulder part doesn't really extend. Again, on a model that was set up for Unreal Engine for this purpose, it would probably have features like that. So it's going to be really hard to get this part into his shoulder. Now, I want to make sure that the gun is very level, like he's aiming forward. If the front hand, his left hand, doesn't quite grip the gun properly, don't worry about that. We can fix that later in the animation, just as long as the gun is in the right place in relation to his right hand and it looks like he's aiming directly forward. Okay, we can hit save here in the top left of the screen and we can close this down. Okay, now we're finally ready to set up the animations for the character. Let's go back to our Sheriff folder and create a new folder. We'll name this one Blueprints. We'll open that up. Now we need to create an animation blueprint by right-clicking, going up to Animation, Animation Blueprint. We're going to associate this with our character's skeleton. In my case, it's called Sheriff Skeleton. I'll press Create, and I'll name this ABP for Animation Blueprint _ Sheriff. Okay, now we need to create a blend space. So I'm going to right-click, go to Animation, Blend Space. I'm going to associate this with the character. We'll call this BSP, which stands for Blend Space, _ I'm going to call this one Non-Combat. So this is where we're branching off from that previous video we did. We're going to set up a more intricate character movement system with different states, more options for the character. So in this case, I'm actually going to create another blend space and I'll name it BSP _ Combat. So the character is going to have two different movement sets or animation sets based on whether he's in combat or not. And really it's based on whether he's aiming his gun or not. Okay, so from this point on, it's really important to understand one thing, and that's this. If I look at the default character, you might think that this person right here is the character, but it's not. The character is actually this capsule. The person inside is just a piece of art that does things based on what the capsule is doing. The capsule is what the game engine considers to be your character. And so what we're going to do next is get our art and our capsule talking to each other so that the little person inside knows which animations to play based on what the capsule is currently doing, whether it's falling or moving fast forward, moving slowly backwards, that sort of thing. So we're going to set up an animation blueprint for our Sheriff character, which communicates with this capsule and understands what the capsule is doing in the world when the game is being played. So let's do that. Back in our Sheriff folder, in the Blueprints folder, I'm going to edit these blend spaces. Let's first open up BSP Non-Combat. So this is actually a really cool window. This is where we can blend between all of our different animations that we downloaded. So down here, we've got this graph. Over here on the right, we've got a list of all of our animations that we've imported. And then on the left, we have a bunch of properties or asset details. Now notice on the graph, we have this vertical axis labeled none and a horizontal axis labeled none. We got to give those proper names. So up here on the left, I'm going to open up vertical and horizontal axis. Let's name the horizontal one direction. Now our character is able to face in a full 360-degree arc because it's a 3D game, right? But we don't want to set our minimum value to 0 and our maximum value to 360. We want the center of the graph right here to be 0, and then your character can turn 180 degrees to the right or 180 degrees to the left. So the minimum and maximum value are going to be -180 and 180. Now down here on the vertical axis, I'm going to change the name to speed. Obviously the minimum speed is 0 and the maximum speed is kind of arbitrary. It could be whatever you want, but the third person character that comes with Unreal Engine, the default speed is 500. So I'm just going to type that in because we're kind of just hijacking this default character. If you want the character to walk faster or slower by default, you'll understand how to do that by the end of this video. Okay, so now our vertical axis you can see is labeled speed and the horizontal axis is labeled direction. If you hold down Control, this little X here will follow your mouse. And you can see if I put this in the middle at the bottom, speed and direction are both about 0. And as I go up, direction is 0, speed is about 500. And you can see that we've set the ranges for this graph. And actually, I just realized that we want our character to be able to sprint faster than his default running speed. So let's go back over to our vertical axis and let's increase the maximum speed to like 900 so we can run really fast. Okay, so this is the non-combat blend space. So let's grab all of our non-combat animations. First, I'm going to grab idle and drag it onto the graph, and I'll hold down shift and snap it to the bottom center of the graph. So when he's going 0 miles per hour, he's going to be playing this idle animation. Now I'm going to grab the walk animation, the one where he's not aiming, and hold down shift and snap it to the middle. And you can see it snapping to about 225 because the graph has just a certain number of subdivisions, but you can actually click on this dot and then type in exactly whatever speed you want him to be able to walk. Through some experimentation, I found that these walking animations look pretty good at about 150. So I'm going to set his walking speed to 150 right here. I'm going to grab the running animation, the one where he's not aiming, and I'll snap it to the middle. And I want this to play when he's going 500 units per second. Now I'll grab the sprinting animation and I'll snap it at the very top, and that's just 900. So if you hold down Control and move this little X around, you can see these animations will blend as the character increases in speed. Pretty nice. Okay, that's actually it for the non-combat blend space. So let's go ahead and save this and close it. Now let's do the combat blend space. So I'm going to set this up pretty much the same way. I'm going to name my horizontal axis direction, and let's set the minimum value to -180 and the maximum value to 180. I'm going to name the vertical axis speed. Minimum value is obviously 0. And for the maximum value, I'm going to leave it at 500. We're going to make it so that he can't sprint and aim at the same time. Now this all depends on how you want your game to feel, but I kind of want to make it feel sort of realistic, where if you're sprinting as hard as you can, you really can't fire off a good shot. You're really just trying to find cover or something like that. So you could either aim and shoot, or you could sprint. You can't do both. Okay, I'm going to grab aim idle and snap it to the bottom center, and we can see that he's aiming. Pretty cool. I'm going to grab aim walk forward and I'll snap it to the middle, but I'll click on it and make sure that the speed is set to 150. Then I'll grab aim run forward and we'll snap it to the top, which is 500. So now we have this blend space just like before. But when the character's aiming, I want him to be able to strafe, which means if my camera's facing forward, but we're moving him to the right, to like towards screen right, I want him to stay facing the direction the camera is facing when he's in combat mode. And so that's why we have all these extra animations like run backwards, walk right, and all that stuff. So I'm going to grab aim run left and I'll hold down shift and I'll snap it right here. So this, if we click on it, we can see that this is direction -90, speed 500. So when he's going 90 degrees to the left at full speed, he'll be doing this animation. We can do the same thing on the right. Let's snap it right here. So when he's running to the right at 500 units per second, he's going to play this animation. Now for backwards, we're just going to snap this to both outside corners of the graph. So now he can run backwards. Cool. Let's do the same thing for walking. So I'll grab aim walk right and I'll snap it right here, but I'll click it and set the speed to about 150. Let's do walk left, change the speed to 150, and then we can do walk backward on both outside edges. So now our character can be walking forward. He can start walking to the right. He can start walking backwards. Maybe he can go back to walking towards the right, but then he can start running to the right. And you can see that this gives you a really cool, smooth animation set. And it actually invents animations in between the main ones. Okay, let's save it and close it. So now if we press play, let's see how the default character behaves. We press play, we can see we got the silver character named Quinn, and she kind of just runs around. She faces the direction she's going. It's pretty basic, and she can jump. So now we need to hijack that character and replace it with our character's art, and we need our 3D model of the sheriff to see what the capsule is doing and play the proper animation at the proper time. So to do that, we have to go into the ABP sheriff. So here's a graph, and you can kind of think of this like a math equation. We have to plug an equation into the output pose, and whatever the equation says, that's the animation or the pose that it's going to play. Now our character can be in multiple different states. It can be jumping, he can be walking around, or he can be aiming and walking around. So we need to create something called a state machine. So I'll right click and I'll search for state machine, and let's call this sheriff states. and we'll plug this into the output pose. Now we can double click into sheriff states, and this is where Unreal Engine can get kind of confusing if you've never used it before. We just zoomed into a graph within a graph. So if you pay attention up here at the top, you'll be able to see where we are. I'm going to be switching between these graphs a lot, zooming in and back out. So just try to pay attention to which one you're in, and I'll try to mention the one that I'm going into. So now we're inside of sheriff states, and you can think of this kind of like a flow chart. So entry means upon entry into the game, when the game starts playing, the sheriff is going to go into a state. So I'm going to click and drag from this pin and drop it into empty space, and I'm going to choose add state, and I'll call this one non-combat. So this is the character's non-combat state. For now, he can only be in the non-combat state. Let's set that up first. So I'll double click into non-combat, and we're going to use our non-combat blend space that we set up. And I'll drag and drop that into here. Let's press compile, and we can see that the character over here on the left starts idling because he's not moving in any direction. We can actually fiddle with this. If we zoom in right here on this node, I can type in a higher speed. Let's type in 150, which is his walk speed, and then go up here in the top left and press compile, and he starts walking. I can type in his run speed, which is 500, and compile. He starts running, and then again, his sprinting speed is 900, and now he's sprinting. Set that back to 0 and compile, and now he's idling again. Now the game wouldn't be very much fun if you had to pause the game and type in the speed you want to walk. So we want to get that speed from the capsule itself. And we want to feed that variable into this speed slot so that at every moment of gameplay, this 3D model of our sheriff knows how fast the character's moving. Same thing with the direction. So here's how we do that. I'm going to go up here to the top and click on event graph. And this is going to get pretty technical, but just follow along step by step, and I'll try to make it make sense. So right here on this red node, I'm going to click on this little output that looks kind of like a home plate for a baseball field. That's called the execution pin. I'm going to click and drag and drop this into empty space, and I'm going to search for cast to third person character. And then the object of this is going to plug back into this green node, which is called try get pawn owner. So basically what we've done is told our 3D model of the sheriff to pay attention to what the capsule is doing. That's what these nodes do. This is saying, hey, look at the capsule, which is the actual character, the third person character. So now we can do things. We can figure out what that capsule is doing. And remember, what we're trying to do is figure out speed and direction. We're trying to create two numbers called speed and direction based on what the capsule is doing. So right here, on this blue output pin where it says as third person character, I'm going to click and drag this into empty space and search for get velocity. When you type that in, you might have to scroll down to find it at the bottom. And now I'm also going to search for get actor rotation. Now you might think that we're looking for speed and direction, and we have velocity and rotation, and that's kind of the same thing, right? It's actually not quite the same thing. Velocity in common everyday speech does mean speed, but in more technical sort of mathematical speak, it actually means speed and the direction you're going. So the numbers we need are actually contained within this node, and we need to split them apart. So I'm going to go to return value and search for vector length, which is just a fancy word for speed. And I'm also going to search for calculate direction. Now let's plug this little purple node from the actor rotation into direction. Okay, so that's it. That's actually the math equation right there. This is speed and this is direction. So what we need to do is promote those to variables or convert them into numbers. So I'm going to right click on this green output node, and I'm going to choose promote to variable, and I'm going to start typing speed. Let's do the same thing here. I'm going to right click, promote to variable, and I'll type in direction. So now we have these two variables called speed and direction. Now, quick tip about Unreal Engine. If you see this execution pin on the left side of a node, something has to be plugged in there or nothing will happen. This will never activate. So in this case, what we can do is just kind of scroll back to the last output execution pin and plug it into here. And then I'll just kind of string these together like that. Now that should be enough to get our character moving in a basic way. Up here in the top left, I'm going to hit compile and save. Now let's go back to our non-combat tab right here. And here's where we plugged our blend space into the output pose. We're inside of the non-combat state. Notice now that down here we have two variables called speed and direction. So what we can actually do is just click on speed, drag it way up here and drop it into speed. And we'll do the same thing with direction. So these two little nodes right here are actually our entire equation compressed down into little icons. So now all that information about what the capsule is doing and where it's going are being fed into the non-combat blend space, and the character should be able to pick the proper animation at any given moment. Let's go ahead and compile and save this. Now let's go into the default character and replace it with our character. So down here under third person blueprints, we're going to open this up, double click on BP third person character. Okay, so this is actually the brains of the default character in Unreal Engine. We don't have to worry about this yet. Let's go over to the viewport tab right here, and now we can see a visual representation of the character. I'm going to click on the model of the character inside, and we can swap this out for our 3D model. So right here, where it says skeletal mesh asset, I'm going to search for the sheriff. I'll plug him in. And now we can see that he's not moving. And that's because Quinn, the default character, has her own animation blueprint. So we need to plug ours in. So over here, where it says anim class, by default, it says ABP Quinn. I'll just type in sheriff, and there's our ABP sheriff. And now we can see that he's idling. Now we have a problem. He's not holding his gun, and we did all that work to set up his gun, right? Well, that was just kind of a preview asset. At this point, we have to actually attach it for real to the actual character. So over here on the left side, we can see a list of all the components that make up this character. There's like the capsule, the character himself, a camera, but we need to add a static mesh. So I'm going to click on add right here, start typing static mesh, and we'll call this rifle. And if it's not already underneath the mesh of the character, just go ahead and drag it and drop it onto mesh character mesh right there. Now this static mesh is parented to the character, but it doesn't know which bone to be parented to yet. So I'm going to go over here to the right side of the screen, and where it says parent socket none, just click on this little search and search for the gun socket right here, the one that we set up. Okay, now we need to tell it which model is the gun. So I'm going to click on here where it says static mesh, and I'll search for AR-15, and we'll click it. Now sometimes I've noticed that the gun appears in the scene, but it's not exactly where it should be. Maybe it's floating above his head or something. So if that happens, just check your transform values over here. Sometimes they have weird numbers. If you just click on these little arrows, it sets them back to default, and your gun should now be floating in the proper place, should be roughly attached to his hand. Okay, let's go ahead and hit compile and save. And now we're able to test our character out. Let's press play right here at the top. Okay, now we've got our soldier or our sheriff, and he can run around, but there's a couple problems. First of all, he can't slow down. Remember, we set up the walking animation and the sprinting animation. He can't go any faster. He also can't jump, or he can jump, but he plays a really weird animation. So let's fix the speeding up and slowing down issue first. So I'm going to go back into BP third person character inside of the third person blueprints. This is where we just were. Now you don't have to follow along with this part because I want to show you what we did in the previous video the last time we did this and how it's different from what I'm going to show you this time. So again, without following along, this is what we did last time. I wanted the left control button to make him walk slower. So what we did last time was search for left control, and now we have this event called left control, and when the button was pressed, we could slow down the character, and when the button was released, we could speed him back up. Now that's a simple way to do it, but it's not really the right way to do it. We don't really want to hard code controls right into the characters themselves, because what if we want to change it later? Or maybe we want to use left control to control something else on a different character. There's going to be a conflict. So it's much better to set up what are called input actions or enhanced input actions, and I'll show you how to do that. So back in the third person folder under input, you see something here called IMC default. IMC stands for input mapping context, and then you see a folder called actions. Let's go ahead and open up actions. And we can see that we have 3 default actions already set up. These are the ones that come with the default character. It can jump, it can look, and it can move. I want to create a new action, so I'm going to right click and go to input, input action, and I'll name this IA for input action walk. Now I'm going to double click on this to show you what's inside, but we don't really have to change anything. I just want to show you what's going on in here so you understand it. First of all, the main thing that you need to pay attention to with these input actions is the value type. So by default, it's set to digital bool, which just means it's a button press. Like, is the control key being pressed or is it not being pressed? If you need to do something like create a throttle for a racing game, obviously a throttle is not just a button press, it's either going up or going down. And so you can create axis 2D. So there's different types of data types here, but in this case, we're just going to do digital bool, and we're not going to change this at all. We can just close it. Let's actually set up the other actions that we're going to be using throughout this video, just while we're here in the folder. So I'm going to right click, go to input, new input action, and I'm going to type IA sprint, create another one called input action aim. And then we obviously want him to be able to shoot too. So I'm going to right click, input action, and name it IA shoot. Okay. So we'll set those up later. Let's set up the walking one first. I'm gonna go back one folder to the input folder, and then I'm gonna double click on IMC default. And right here, we can open up mappings. We can see that the 3 default actions are already set up, and let's actually twirl down one of these little triangles and see how they set it up. So now you can see hopefully why we set up our actions this way instead of hard coding the keystrokes into the character, because you can see that the jump action can be triggered by a spacebar, or if this is being sent to like an Xbox or PlayStation, it can be set to one of the gamepad buttons, or if you're sending it to mobile, it can be set to a certain touch of the screen. If we go to the move, we can see that the character can be moved with WASD or with the arrow keys. Or if we're sending it to a console, it can be moved with the thumbstick. So The benefits of using input actions instead of hard coding the keystrokes into the character is you can set up the movement and inputs once and send it to whatever game system you want. Or you could set up the input system and apply it to multiple characters. If we hard coded our keystrokes into the character itself, we'd have to do it every time for every character. But if we set up this IMC default with the actions folder, we can apply it to any character in the future. So this is the right way to do it. So let's close these up and then add a new mapping. And I'm going to choose my IA walk right here at the bottom. And now I can open this up and I'm going to choose which keystroke is going to control the walk. So I'm going to click on this little keyboard and then I'm going to type the left control button. So now left control will control the walking. If you want another keystroke to also do that, you can add another one by pressing the little plus right here. And then let's say we're sending this to a console. I can choose gamepad and let's say the D-pad up. For some reason, we want that to be the walking button. So now if we make a PlayStation game out of this, the walk button is set. Now, if you don't want that, you can go ahead and trash it, and we can fold all this up and add another mapping. Let's do sprinting. And if I twirl that down, I think I want the left shift key to be the sprint button. Let's add another mapping. I'm going to do IA aim, and I want the right mouse button to be the aim button. So I'll click this and then I'll right click to say the right mouse button. Let's add one more. And this one's going to be IA shoot. Open this up and I want the left mouse button to be the shooting button. So I'll click on the keyboard and then click it again. So now left mouse button is my shooting button. Cool. Let's go ahead and save it and we'll close this window. Now we can go back into the blueprints folder, into third person blueprint, and just kind of find an open area. I usually go down here at the bottom. I'm going to right click and search for IA walk. So now we've just called the input action walk. Basically what we're going to do is when this is pressed, we want to slow down the character speed to 150, and when it's released, we want it to go back up to 500. So I'm going to grab the character movement component from the list over here and drag and drop it onto the canvas, and I'll click and drag this out, and I'll search for set max walk speed, and we can actually duplicate that node. So we have two of them, and make sure that this blue one is still plugged into target right here. So when the action is started, like this, we want to set the max walk speed to 150. And when the action is completed, we want to set the max walk speed to 500. It goes back to default. Cool, let's save it and test it. So I'm going to press compile, save, close the window, we'll press play, and you can see he runs around by default, but if I hold down the left control, he slows down and he does his walking animation. And if I let go of the left control, he speeds back up. Pretty cool. Let's do the same thing, but for sprinting. So I'm going to right click and search for IA_sprint. Let's open this up and we can actually just copy and paste these nodes here and reuse them. So when this is started, we want the max walk speed to go up to 900. And when it's completed, we want to go back down to 500 like this. Let's go ahead and compile and save, press play. And again, I can slow down or I can hold down shift and he goes really fast and he plays that faster sprinting animation. Now take note, I am aware that his hands don't quite line up with the gun. These animations are not really the best, these ones from Mixamo, and also the gun isn't really made for these animations. They might have been holding a different shaped gun. So again, later on, I'm going to show you how to fix this. Don't worry about it yet. Okay, now let's see if we can get the character to go into the aiming state and play those different animations. This is where it's going to get really cool, but a little bit more complicated. So once again, let's call the IA aim. So this one's got to be set up a little bit differently. So remember that the character is the capsule, not the model of our soldier. Right now we're in the brains of the character capsule, and we need to be able to send a signal to the soldier that the capsule is aiming so that the soldier knows to play different animations, because we're in two different assets. They aren't talking to each other right now. So what I need to do is create a variable called aiming. So over here on the left side, I'm going to go to the variables menu and I'm going to click on plus and I'll name this aiming with a question mark. So now we have a variable called aiming and it's a Boolean, which just means it's true or false. It's a checkbox. It's either aiming or not. Let's go up to the top and press compile. And now if we go over to the right side of the screen, we can see that aiming with a question mark has a checkbox which is empty. So by default, the character is not aiming. We could always turn this on to make that the default, but we want to leave it off. Okay, I'm going to click on aiming right here in the variables and drag and drop it onto the canvas. And I'm going to choose set aiming. So when this input action aim is started, I want to set aiming to true by turning on this checkbox. I'll duplicate that. When it's completed, we want to set aiming to false by turning off the checkbox. Now by default, that doesn't do anything. Nothing's actually happening. We haven't told the animation blueprint of the soldier to pay attention to whether it's aiming or not. We've just set up the signal within the character blueprint, the third person character. So right now this won't do anything, but there is a way to test it anyway. So if the character's aiming, we can search for print text, and I want it to print the word start aiming. Let's duplicate this. When you stop aiming, I want it to print the text stop aiming. So that's a really handy little thing to test functions that aren't fully set up yet. You just want to know if the trigger is working. So I'll show you how it works. Let's go ahead and press compile and save, and we'll press play. And if you pay attention to the top left corner of the screen, if I right click, the word start aiming appears, and when I let go, it says stop aiming. So it's printing the words on the screen, and that's how we know the trigger is actually working. Okay, let's go in and delete that print text node. So now let's feed that information into our animation blueprint so that the animation blueprint knows to switch over and play the aiming animations instead. So I'll close this down and we'll go into our Sheriff folder under Blueprints, and we'll go into ABP Sheriff. Again, remember that the character blueprint and the animation blueprint are two different assets and they don't talk to each other by default. So we need to get the information from the capsule into this character. So we're going to do that the same way we did the direction and the speed. Let's go back over to our event graph here in the top left. And remember, these three nodes here are telling our animation blueprint to pay attention to that character capsule. And then all this is basically figuring out what direction it's facing and how fast it's moving. Let's grab another one out of this blue output, and I'm going to search for aiming. So I'm going to say get aiming with a question mark. So now we're saying pay attention to whether the character is aiming, the character capsule. And if it is aiming, we want to set a variable within the animation blueprint that says, yep, it's aiming. So I'm going to right click and choose promote to variable, and we'll rename this definitely aiming. Obviously you can call it whatever you want. Maybe something a little more proper and technical would be good, but sometimes I just like to make little jokes for myself. Now remember what I said, if there's a node coming out of the left, something needs to be plugged in there or nothing will happen. So let's go ahead and drag this all the way over to the right, and we'll string it from this direction node right here. Okay, so now our animation blueprint knows whether the capsule is aiming. So let's do something with it. Let's go back into our non-combat tab right here. And then right here, we're gonna go back to the Sheriff states. So right now, upon entry into the game, the character immediately goes into the non-combat state, and then there's nothing else it can do. What we wanna do is have it go into the combat state when it starts to aim. So let's click and drag a little arrow, drop it into empty space, and choose add state, and we'll call this one combat. Let's really quickly set up the combat state. So I'm going to double click into it. And this is basically the exact same thing as we did before. We need to grab our combat blend space, drop it into the result. And then again, we need the direction and the speed, but we've already set that up. We don't have to do it again. Just grab it from over here on the left, speed and direction like that. And we'll press compile. Let's go back to Sheriff states right here. And you see this little circle right here on the line in between non-combat and combat. That's the rule that allows the character to go into that other state. So when is it allowed to go from combat to non-combat? Well, it's when the character's aiming, right? So let's double click on this little circle, and let's grab this variable that we created here on the left called definitely aiming. I'm gonna say get definitely aiming, and we'll drag and drop this into empty space and search for equal, and then plug that into this node here that says can enter transition. So if definitely aiming is equal to true, make sure you check that checkbox that means true, then it can enter the combat state. So I'll press compile. Let's go back to Sheriff states. Now we actually have a problem. Once it's in the combat state, it can't go back to non-combat. So let's go ahead and drag and drop a line backwards that direction, and let's set up the same rule but in reverse. So I'll click on this little circle. Let's grab the definitely aiming variable. We'll say get definitely aiming. We'll plug it into an equal node and then plug that into here. So now if definitely aiming is equal to false, then it can go back to the non-combat state. And we'll press compile and save. Ooh, that was a lot. So let's test it out. So we've got our character, he's running around like normal. If I hold down the right mouse button, he aims and he moves around. So all of those animations are there. Pretty cool. But now we have a few problems. The character can aim and he can slow down and walk while aiming. That's good. But he can also sprint while aiming. I don't know if you can tell, but if I hold down shift, he moves faster, but his legs don't move any faster. So it looks like he's ice skating. We don't want him to be able to sprint while he's aiming. Or rather, we don't want him to be able to aim while he's sprinting. We want the sprint to override the aiming. So basically, if you're aiming and you hold down shift, we want him to stop aiming, whether or not you're holding down the right button. So we can do that. And then the other problem with this is we can see that he's aiming in the direction that he's moving instead of aiming the direction the camera is facing. And so it'd be really hard to play this game, right? You'd have to kind of line it up like this with your enemies with the arrow keys instead of with the mouse. So while the aiming key is active and he's aiming, we want him to change his behavior so he always faces the direction of the camera. Even if I'm running left and right like this, he'll start strafing and face the direction that the camera is facing. So let's fix those two problems. Let's fix the sprinting animation first, because that's the easiest one. So if I go back down to third-person blueprints into the BP third-person character, right here where it says sprint, When this is started, obviously it sets his speed to 900. I'm gonna grab this aiming variable, drag and drop it into space, and choose set aiming, and plug it in like that, so that when he starts sprinting and going 900 units per second, aiming is set to false. No matter what button I'm pushing, it's gonna be set to false. So let's try that out. I'll press compile, save. I'm gonna aim, start moving, and I'm gonna hold down the aiming button. I'm not gonna let go of it, but if I press shift to sprint, you can see that he stops doing the aiming animation. Pretty cool. So that's the behavior we want. Next, let's fix that camera thing. I want him to aim where the camera is looking. So down here where it says input action aim, again, all we're doing is setting a variable called aiming. But let's also change the behavior of the camera. So I'm gonna click on character movement right here. And over here on the right side, I'm gonna scroll down and look for character movement rotation settings. We can see by default, this checkbox called use controller desired rotation is off and orient rotation to movement is on. That's the default behavior. When he's aiming, we wanna switch those. So let's drag and drop character movement onto the canvas. And from the blue pin, I'm gonna search for set orient rotation to movement. And then from that execution pin, I'm also gonna search for set use controller desired rotation. Let's duplicate those two nodes and bring them down here like this. Now remember, the default setting is for orient rotation to be checked and use controller desired rotation to be unchecked. So for the top one, I'm gonna have that reversed. So when the aim is triggered, it's gonna set the aiming variable to true. And then if I plug this in here, it's also going to turn off orient rotation to movement and turn on use controller desired rotation. When the aim action is completed, it's gonna set aiming to false. Then it's gonna turn on orient rotation to movement and use controller desired rotation. Now it's really important that we plug this blue character movement node into all of these targets or else it won't work. You'll probably get an error. Okay, let's press compile and save. Okay, so again, when he's not aiming, he turns to face the direction that he's moving rather than the direction the camera's facing. But when I press aim, he turns to face the direction the camera is facing and he strafes if he has to. And that's good. And that works whether he's walking or running. But when I sprint, he goes back to sprinting and stops aiming. Now we have another problem that we have to deal with. Let me show you that. Let's say our player right clicks to aim and then starts moving and then starts sprinting, but he didn't let go of right click and now he's strafing. Well, he doesn't ever go back to orienting the proper way, so he's gonna kind of ice skate around. So we need to fix this. You have to think about all the different things that your player character might do, what buttons they might push, and what combinations they might come up with to break your game, basically. So we can set this up in a slightly different way so that when he starts sprinting, whether or not the character is holding down the right mouse button to aim, he'll stop aiming and his orientation will be fixed. So let's jump back into third-person character and let's try to diagnose why that happened, what went wrong. So what we did was I pressed the right mouse button and he started aiming. He started facing the direction the camera was facing. And then without releasing the right mouse button, I started sprinting. I pressed the sprint button. So what that did was it set the max walk speed to 100 and it turned off the aiming state. But since I never let go of the right mouse button, this chain never happened. This is where it sets the rotation values back to the way they're supposed to be. And that never happened. So let's disconnect these nodes right here by alt clicking, and we'll grab these 5 nodes and drag them down, and we'll do something slightly different with these. Instead of waiting for the player to let go of the right mouse button to set the rotation back to default, let's have it constantly check every second whether the character is aiming or not. So the way we do that is we right click and search for event tick. Instead of the event of a mouse button or a key press, what's happening is it's just gonna check every moment of gameplay and it's gonna execute whatever I plug in here every moment of gameplay. So I'm gonna grab this execution pin and search for branch, and I'm gonna grab the aiming variable and plug this into the condition like this. So now if aiming is true, the character will be facing the way we want them to. And if aiming is not true, it'll be doing the default behavior of facing the direction he's going. And this is every moment of gameplay. So no matter which path the player took to the aiming state or the non-aiming state, it should always behave correctly. So let's press compile and save and test it out. So I'm gonna right click to aim and I'll start moving and then I'll start sprinting. And now we can see that he's not strafing, even though I'm still holding down the right mouse button for aiming. Because I'm sprinting, aiming is turned off and now he's not strafing anymore. And if I let go of sprinting and let go of aiming and re-click it, now he's strafing again. So this feels a lot more natural. And it feels a lot more realistic this way because let's say he's aiming and strafing and then he has to sprint into cover. Now he faces that direction. He's not really concerned with the people over there anymore. He's just trying to get behind this blue cube. Pew pew. Okay, we're just about done setting up the aim state, but there's one more little thing I want to add to make it feel a little bit more playable. And I'm sure that a lot of you who play video games are already aware of what I'm about to do. When the character aims, I think the camera should zoom in so we can see better what we're aiming at. So here's how we can do that. If you double click and go into your Be Third Person character, into the viewport, again, we can see all of the components that the character is made up of right here. You'll notice that there's something called the follow camera and the camera boom. So the camera is exactly what it sounds like, it's the camera. The camera boom is the arm that determines where the camera should be in relation to your character. So right now, if I click on camera boom, we can see this red line appear. And over here in the details panel, we can see that the boom arm is 400 units long and the offsets are all set to 0. When I right click to aim, I want the camera to get closer to him or to zoom in. And I also want it to move up and over his left shoulder so we can see, because otherwise we're just zooming into his shoulder blades, right? So let's figure out what settings we want it to end up on. Just remember these default settings though, so we can go back to them. So by default, camera arm length is 400 and these are all 0. So let's say when he aims, I want the camera to zoom in and I want the arm to shorten to a length of maybe 150. Now you can see the camera's a lot closer to him. Let's see what that looks like by pressing compile and save. Now you can see the camera's a lot closer to him, but we actually can't really see anything because it's just zoomed into his shoulder blades. So let's also move it up and over his right shoulder. Back in the camera boom settings, I'm going to move the socket offset. So whenever you see 3 boxes like this, it's always the X, Y, and Z axis. So if I want to move it up, I'm going to type in maybe something like 50 units in the Z axis, and we can see that the camera has moved up. If I want to move it over to the right, I'm going to go to the second column and also type in 50. All right, let's press compile and save and we'll test this out. So this is what the camera will look like when he's aiming and zooming in. You can test it out by aiming and seeing if that feels about right. And these are all numbers that you can change later, but let's just go with this for now. All right, back into the blueprint. Let's set the numbers back to default. So that was 400 for the target arm length, and then all these other numbers should be 0. If we jump back into the event graph, I'm going to look for my aim action, and we're going to plug in some things to make it zoom in when we activate the aim action. So I'm going to grab the camera boom and drag and drop it into the canvas here. And I'm going to drag out from this and search for set target arm length. Remember, we're going to set that to about 150 when the character starts aiming. And then I'll duplicate this and we'll set it back to 400 when the character's not aiming, like so. Again, don't forget to plug in this blue camera boom node into the target or you will get an error. All right, let's compile it and save it and test it out. Okay, when I zoom, we can see that the camera is zooming in when he starts aiming, but first of all, it's not zooming over his shoulder, so we still have to fix that, but also it's instantaneous, so we'll have to fix that as well, but we'll do that in a second. But it's working, so let's continue. After the camera zooms in, we want to set the socket offset. So I'm going to drag out from camera boom and search for set socket offset. Let's actually right click on this yellow input and choose split struct pin, and that allows us to change these settings separately. We want to set the socket offset Y to 50 and Z to 50. We'll plug it in like that. And again, when we let go of the zoom button, we want it to go back to the default. Don't forget to plug in your target. Okay, let's try that out. Compile, save. So now you can see when I aim, it does zoom in over his right shoulder, but this is too jarring. So let's add a little smooth transition. To do that, what we need to do is scoot these 5 nodes over, make some space, and we're going to right click and search for a timeline. And I'm going to choose add timeline. Let's name this timeline TL_camera zoom. TL obviously stands for timeline. So a timeline is just what it sounds like. It's a timeline that you can add keyframes to. So let's double click on this yellow node, and now we're inside of our timeline, and I'll click on track up here in the top left to add a track. Let's add a float track, and we'll call this camera zoom. So right here where it says length 5, that's 5 seconds. Let's make that a little bit faster. We obviously don't want the zoom to take 5 seconds. So let's do like a quarter of a second. So 0.25. And now I'm going to right click on the timeline and add a key, but I want the key to be at time 0 and value 0. Then I'll right click again on the timeline and add another key. I want this one to be at time 0.25, so at a quarter second, and I want the value to be 1. So we're just going to try to blend from a value of 0 to 1. Now, if this goes off screen, just go ahead and click on these 2 buttons right here, and that should frame it up for you. So now we can see our timeline goes from a value of 0 to a value of 1 over the length of a quarter second. So this is going to be our zoom. It's going to go from not zoomed to zoom in a quarter second. Now you can see that this is a constant motion. It's going to be kind of jarring because it's going to just start and stop at the same speed. So if you want to slow that down and kind of ease it in and ease it out, you can right click on this keyframe and choose auto. Let's press compile and save, and then we'll go back to our event graph right here. Okay, so when the character presses the right mouse button, it's going to set aiming to true, and then it's going to play the timeline like that. Now I'm going to run this update execution pin into set target arm length right here. We actually don't need these bottom 2 anymore, so we can delete them. And that's because this timeline node can handle reversing back to default by itself, which is pretty cool. Okay, now we need something called a lerp. So I'm going to right click and search for lerp. Lerp is just short for linear interpolate, which is long for blend. So lerp is just a blend node. So what we want to do is blend between the default arm length, which is 400, and the shorter arm length, the zoomed in length, which is 150. And the way a lerp node works is when the alpha is 0, the out value here is A, or 400 in this case. And when alpha is set to 1, then the output value is 150, or B. So what we can do is take this camera zoom timeline and plug it into alpha. So it's going to blend between a value of 0 to 1, or in other words, it's going to fade from 400 to 150 smoothly. And let's plug that into the target arm length. Now to reverse it and set it back to default, when the action is completed, we're going to reverse the timeline like this. It's going to play backwards. Now we need to set this one up. So let's just create another lerp node, and we'll plug the camera zoom into alpha, just like before. And now we want to fade from 0 to 50. So again, this is the motion where it moves up and over his shoulder. So we're going to plug this return value into the Y socket and the Z socket. So now over time, it's going to fade from 0 to 50 and back again. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing, but here's the setup if you want to check your work. Let's go ahead and hit compile and save, and let's test it out. So now when I right click to zoom, the camera moves smoothly over a quarter second instead of just snapping instantly. Okay, so we're almost done. Let's set up the final action that he can do, which is actually shooting. So let's go back into our blueprint, and down here at the bottom, we're going to call IA shoot. So now when the player pulls the trigger and clicks the shoot button, we want it to play that shooting animation. But there's no way to just drag and drop an animation into here. We have to first convert it to an animation montage. And that's really easy to do. Let's just go into our animation folder and find our firing rifle animation. Should look something like this. Just right click on it and go create anim montage. And we'll just name this recoil montage or something like that. Okay, go ahead and save it. And now that we've created that montage, what we can do is out of this IA shoot, when the action is started, we can search for play anim montage. And where it says anim montage, we'll choose the recoil montage. Okay, let's compile, save, and let's test it out. So if I aim, I can click my left mouse button and I can see that nothing's happening. So there's obviously something else we need to do. And if you remember from what we talked about before, the character capsule's brain knows that it's shooting, but our animation blueprint, the actual soldier himself, doesn't know that what the capsule's doing. So we need to go edit the animation blueprint. So in the Sheriff Blueprints folder, let's go into ABP Sheriff, and up here in the top, let's actually go all the way back to the anim graph. So this is the state machine. If you remember, that's the thing that's choosing the actual animations that are being played at any given moment based on what the capsule's doing. And if you remember when we set up our animation blueprints, nothing in there has the shooting animation. There's the running in all the different directions, there's the aiming, there's the idling, but there's no shooting. So what we want to do is actually override these locomotion and aiming animations when the player pulls the trigger. And it's going to override it and play the shooting animation. So to do that, we need to create something called a default slot. I'm going to drag and drop off of this, and I'm going to search for default slot. So just by putting that in between our state machine and the final output pose, this little node here, the default slot node, lets our character's movement animations be overridden by animation montages. In this case, it's that recoil montage. So now if I press save, I should be able to press play. Let's aim, and I'll click, and you can see it's playing the shooting animation, playing the recoil animation, which is really cool. Now, like always, we have some problems. First of all, if I'm walking when I shoot, you can see his legs stop moving because it's overriding his whole body. So we need to fix that. We need to make it play just on the top half of his body. That's not hard to do. And the other problem is, if I shoot when he's not aiming, it kind of goes into the full animation where his gun goes up and he shoots. In most games, you can shoot from the hip without aiming, but that would require us to find another shooting from the hip animation, and this video is already getting kind of long and complex enough, so I'm just going to keep it simple and make it so that he can't shoot unless he's aiming. So really quickly, let's fix that problem, and then we'll fix this problem where his legs stop moving when he's firing. So back into the third person blueprints under BP third person character, here's where we just set up the shoot action going into the animation montage. I basically want to make it so that he can only go into the animation montage when aiming is true. So let's search for a branch node, and we'll run it through that first. And I'm going to grab the aiming variable and drop it into the condition. So now, when the player presses the shoot button, it's going to go into the branch, and if aiming is true at that moment, it's going to play the animation montage. If aiming is not true, it's going to do nothing because the false execution pin is plugged into nothing. So let's press compile, save, and let's test it out. So right now, I'm not aiming, and if I click the left mouse button, he doesn't do anything. If I right click and then shoot, he's going to start shooting. Oh, and really quick, you can actually change the feel of this too by speeding up the animation if you want. So I can see right now, this is probably a realistic animation, but for a video game, I want it to feel probably a little bit snappier. And we can actually control that right here where we call the animation montage. I can change the play rate to maybe 2. So it's going to play twice as fast. Let's see what that looks like. Here we go. So now it's at least a little bit faster and the character can kind of spam the fire button. So now we have this problem to fix where his legs get overridden as well when he's shooting. So here's how we fix that. Let's go back into our Sheriff folder and then into the blueprints, into AVP Sheriff. Here's that thing we just set up where we plugged a default slot in between the state machine and the output pose. Again, this is what allows it to be overridden by that shooting animation, but we don't want it to happen on the lower half of the body, only on the top half of the body. So let's alt-click to disconnect this stuff like that, and I'll just move this down here for now. So from the Sheriff states, the state machine, I'm going to click and drag out, and I'm going to search for cache, and I'm going to click on New Save Cached Pose. Let's name this Movement Poses. And now I'm going to right-click and search for the word cache again, and I'm going to choose Use Cache Pose Movement Poses, and we'll plug this into here. Let's press compile. So basically what happened is we created these two nodes, and all this does is it kind of just teleports the information from here to here. So this right now is exactly the same as just plugging this directly in. And this allows us to kind of copy and paste the movement poses around and have multiple copies of it. So now I'm going to right click and search for a node called Layered Blend Per Bone. And what I can do is plug this cached movement poses into the top, and then I'll duplicate it and I'll plug it into the default slot and then plug that into the bottom, and then we'll plug this finally into the output pose. Okay, so that looks confusing, but let me just really quickly explain what's going on. The state machine is where the movement poses are coming from. We're feeding it into this little node that basically copies those movements, and we pasted them here. So now there's 2 copies of his movement, right? One of those copies is being fed into this blend node, and then there's another copy that's first being fed into the default slot and then into the blend node. So we've got 2 copies of his movement, one of which can be overridden by the shooting. What this node is going to let us do is choose a bone in his skeleton above which the animation will be overridden by his shooting animation. So what that means is from his spine down, we'll be using his movement poses, and from his spine up, we'll be using his movement poses unless the player plays the shooting animation, and then the spine up will play the shooting animation. So it's kind of confusing, but hopefully it'll make sense once you see it. So to set that up, we're going to click on this node here called Layered Blend Per Bone. We're going to go over here to Layer Setup, open that up. There's a little thing called Index. Let's open that up too. Now we see something called Branch Filters. Let's click the little plus sign to add one, and we'll open up the index. And now we see bone name, none. It's very important that you type in a bone from the skeleton of your character named exactly right, including capitalization. So if you're using one of the characters from character.ProductionCrate or from Mixamo, then you want to type in spine with a capital S. If you're using a different skeleton or you want the blend to happen at a different joint, here's how you can find the bone that you want to type in. Go into the Sheriff folder, into Meshes, and then click on the Sheriff skeleton. And then click on the bone where you want the transition to happen, and just look at the name right here in the list. Now, if we go back to our animation blueprint, remember we're inside of the Layered Blend Per Bone node right here. One other thing that's useful is to turn on this little checkbox called Mesh Space Rotation Blend. And that's not always required, but I usually turn it on because let's say you're doing a medieval scene instead of a shooting scene, and your character's swinging a sword. Well, these sword swing animations usually lead from the hip, and so if we cancel out the animation from the hips, then the character is not going to rotate far enough to hit in the proper place. But by turning on this checkbox, it's going to add a little bit of extra rotation to the upper body to make sure that the sword hits where it's supposed to. So I usually check on that checkbox by default unless it looks wrong. Okay, now let's compile and save, and I'll press play. Again, if I click but he's not aiming, then he won't shoot. If I aim and click, he'll start shooting. And if I start running and shooting, we can see that he's playing the shooting animation, but his legs are still moving because it's only playing the shooting animation from the spine joint upward, which is pretty cool. Okay, now we have one last thing, which I think you probably just noticed. He can't jump. He just kind of does this. Now, the reason why he's playing the walking animation is because technically he's speeding up and slowing down. He's technically going faster than 0, and so it starts playing a walking animation. So let's fix that one last thing, and then we'll be done. So under Sheriff Blueprints, I'm going to go into AVP Sheriff. Let's go into the event graph. And again, this is where we've been setting up the communication between the capsule and our 3D model. So again, we calculated the speed and the direction, and then we calculated whether the character is aiming. Now let's figure out whether the character is falling. So from this blue node, I'm going to drag and drop and search for falling, and I'll choose is falling, and it creates these nodes. So now our 3D model knows whether the capsule is falling, whether it's off the ground or not. So let's right click on this return value and promote that to a variable. And we can name that variable falling with a question mark. And once again, we need to string this together. So I'm just going to put it at the end of my chain here and string those together. I'll press compile, save. Now to get back to our state machines, I'm going to click on this middle tab where it says combat, and then I'll click on sheriff states. And if you remember, this is where we set up the rule for when the character can go from non-combat to combat. Let's set up another rule for when it can go into the jumping state. Now the jumping state isn't a full blend space. It's not that complicated. It's just the jumping animation. So we don't need to set up a blend space. We can just go over here to our asset browser, grab the jumping loop animation, and drag and drop that into here. And we'll call this jump. Okay, and we're going to set this up very similarly to how we did this. So I'm going to drag an arrow from non-combat to jumping, and then back from jumping to non-combat. Let's double click on this little circle, which is the rule that lets it go into the jumping state. And I'm going to grab falling. I'm going to say get falling. Let's drag and drop this into empty space and search for equal and plug that in. So if falling is equal to true, make sure you turn on that checkbox, then it can enter the jumping state. Let's hit compile. Let's go back to the states, and let's click on the rule that goes back from jump towards non-combat. Double click on that. We'll grab the falling variable again. We'll say get falling, search for equal, and plug that in. So now if falling is equal to false, empty checkbox, then it can go back into the non-combat state. Now we want the character to be able to jump when he's in combat too. So let's do that exact same thing, but from the combat state into jump, and back from jump to the combat state. And just go ahead and repeat all that stuff we just did. Okay, cool. So now the jumping state should be set up. Let's go ahead and test it out. Okay, so now he should be done for the purposes of this video. So let's do a full test to make sure everything's working properly. So by default, if I just start moving with WASD, he's running, he's not aiming, and he's turning to face the direction that he's going. If I hold down Control, he should start walking. Again, not aiming, turning to face the direction he's going. If I hold down Shift, he should sprint. And if I hold down right click, he should start aiming and turn to face the direction the camera is facing. And then again, we can also slow down with the Control key. Now, if I sprint while he's aiming, he should stop aiming and he should go faster, play the sprinting animation, and he should be turning to face the direction he's going instead of the direction the camera's facing. So that's good. If I click when he's not aiming, he should not fire. But if I aim first and then click, he should start firing, and he should be able to fire while he's moving, and his legs should keep working. Looking good. And now for the final test, he should be able to jump. It's not a very complex jump animation. It looks kind of silly, kind of like a Mario jump, but at least he's jumping. And he should be able to jump from the non-combat state and from the aiming combat state. So it all behaves pretty naturally. Now the last thing I said I would show you is how to fix these animations that don't line up. That's a pretty long and tedious process. It's very repetitive. So I'll show you how to do it on a few animations, and then I'll leave you to fix the animations for yourself and get your character set up perfectly. So really quickly, let's go over to our animation folder and pick one of these animations. Let's double click and open Aim Idle. Now sometimes it's kind of hard to see when the joints are visible. So if you have the joints visible and you don't want them, you can go over to Character, Bones, and I'm going to choose Selected Only. So now we don't see bones unless we select them. But how do we select them if we can't see them? We go over here to the skeleton tree and we can click on them, and you can see they light up when you select them. So this pose is pretty close, but I can see that his hand is not quite lined up with the grip of the rifle. So what I'm going to do is go find his left arm, and I'm going to try to rotate this into place, but it's really hard to adjust the animation when he's moving. So first I'm going to go down to the bottom here and click pause. Maybe I'll go to the first frame, and let's rotate this into place. Now it's really important to remember every time you move a bone to go up here and click key, and that's going to modify the animation. If you don't press key, if you forget, then it's going to look like you're modifying it. It's going to look like it's working, but the next time you open the animation or the next time you play the game, it's going to go back to default. So if your animations end up looking weird, you probably forgot to press key, and you have to do that for every bone every time you move it, just to be safe. So if I want to fix his thumb now, I'm going to click on left hand thumb 1, and I'll rotate this like that, and I'll press key right here at the top. So you can see that this character is not set up with IK because it's just based on the Mixamo skeleton. If you'd like a video on how to set up a rig for Unreal with IK, just leave a comment and maybe we can get to that. All right, and that's pretty much it for now. The next step in the process would be to add effects like muzzle flashes, tracers, impact effects, sounds. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, leave a comment and we can show you how to do that too in the next video. Now, if you make anything cool with what you learned here, be sure to share it with us on Instagram or go on the Discord and show us what you made. I always love seeing the characters you guys create with the character builder tool. And if you have any tips or tricks for me for a better or more efficient way to do what I showed you in this video, definitely leave a comment because I'm always trying to improve my workflow. All right, later creators.